So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
So, welcome to this week's Energy Show. This week, we're talking about solar consumer protection. Now, home solar is one of the fastest growing industries in the U.S. We're installing systems and adding jobs like crazy all over the country. It's a very straightforward business. Put the solar panels on your roof, generate electricity, and your savings in electricity are almost always greater than the cost of the system. So you got cash flow positive. Now, it takes some analysis to determine the size of the system that's right for you, the number of solar panels, to determine the energy savings that you're going to get from those panels, and then to translate that kilowatt hour energy savings into dollar savings, because the electric rates can be sometimes kind of complicated. So there's a lot of details also in the choice of the solar panels, the inverters, the way the systems are mounted on the roof, how they're compatible with your shingles, different financing options, and then the warranties on the equipment and the installation. Lots of details there. Now, the vast majority of solar installers are doing this work because they believe in solar. Heck, I started the first national installation company over 15 years ago because I believed rooftop solar was the right thing to do for our economy and our environment. Now, there's probably like 8,000 or 9,000 solar installers all around the U.S. who are conscientious, ethical, want to do a great job on your roof so they get recommendations. But just like in many industries, there's a few companies who are in it to make a quick buck. That's the need for consumer protection. It's important for customers to understand the solar system that they get and understand the practical aspects of their financing, the leasing, the PPAs, the loans, and to understand the warranties that are offered. Now, the solar industry has done a terrific job to self-regulate the people that are working in the industry. Now, to talk about the self-regulation work, my special guest on this week's show is Tom Kimbis. Tom's the Executive Vice President of the Solar Energy Industries Association, or SEIA. He's also SEIA's Chief Counsel. Tom's also the Chairman of the Board at the Solar Foundation and previously worked at the DOE on a number of their solar programs. I've had the pleasure of working with Tom on the Consumer Protection and the Ethics Committees at SEIA for several years. Well, welcome to the show, Tom.
It's great to be here, Barry. Thanks for having me on.
All right, good. Well, we're talking about a real important topic as far as the sustainability of the solar industry, just to make sure that consumers are being treated properly and their expectations are actually met with the energy savings. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what some of the consumer protection issues that we've recently seen?
Sure. And Barry, thanks to those of you in the audience who listening on us who don't know, Barry has been involved with SEIA for many, many years in many capacities, and most recently, I believe you just mentioned on our Consumer Protection Committee and Ethics Committee. And our Consumer Protection Committee has been kind of ramped up in the last 2 years to address a couple of issues that we have seen arise within the solar space. So in terms of, you're asking, what do we see the most in terms of issues that consumers have to deal with that could fall into these categories? The vast majority, when we look into them or states look into them, turn out to be misunderstandings. And some of that has to do with the fact that something that your listeners know well, which is that solar's spreading fast, but it's still a new technology to many. And we need to make sure that consumers who have the bug to go solar and want to save money or want to help the environment for whatever reason, that they're choosing to go solar are on the same page with their solar company. So a lot of it is gaining the familiarity, is kind of fighting through the complexities that come with residential solar. So some of it does come down to misunderstandings between what the consumer expects and what the company is expecting to deliver. Now, that was probably the case with any new electronic invention, whether it's a smartphone or going back to PCs, et cetera. But, this is what we face today in the solar industry. So a lot of them are sort of what I would call innocent misunderstandings. You then have moving to a category which is quite large and obviously is not restrained to the solar industry, but winds up resulting in a number of problems on the consumer side, is advertising. Like any industry, there's a need to be clear, there's a need to be transparent, there's a need to be in compliance with state and federal law when a company does advertise a solar product or service. However, we see instances of phrases such as free solar, which, unless you're giving away a solar system for free, like sort of part of some sort of benevolent giveaway, that system is not free. It's tied to a lease for which you have to make payments.
Yeah, so it's interesting you talk about free solar. I mean, solar industry has been leasing systems. It's a good model for people short on cash. The car industry does the same thing, but the car dealers don't say, "Oh, free car." It's they're
Exactly.
talking about the lease.
And there's the sort of, is the solar company really trying to pull a fast one over on the consumer, or are they just a little bit less familiar with the best ways and the proper ways to advertise? So, yes, you could have some bad apples, but most of the time what we have found, Barry, when encountering this is we contact the company, and the company changes their advertising program, not knowing that was, something that was in violation of the law. And I would say, just to finish up, the third category is, as you mentioned in your introduction, there are a few bad apples out there, just like any other industry. And we do see cases there of misrepresentations of savings or guarantees that, no solar system would ever be able to meet. And that category is one where we're more than happy to see the state come in and throw those folks in jail, because we just don't need them in our industry.
Yeah, in California and many other states, you have a contractor state licensing board, and they're pretty strict about the ways contractors represent themselves. They can advertise, disclosing their contractor's license, and making sure that the contracts themselves are legal. I mean, I've been hearing about these problems, and once in a while, customers call me up or, involved in an issue. What's SEIA doing about some of these issues that could happen from a few bad apples that are in the solar industry trying to make a quick buck?
Yeah, and it is a shame, and I'm sure that many other industries have gone through this and continue to go through this, where, the few who try to make that quick buck are the ones that wind up getting more of the media attention. But SEIA is taking it seriously, taking the issue seriously, and we're actually, contrary to what you might read in some of the press around some of these stories created by these bad apples, we're actually, according to agencies such as the Federal Trade Commission, when we sat down with them, very proactive and very far ahead of other industries in reacting to consumer protection issues. So what we've been doing is developing a suite of products that are all available for free, all available on our website, and designed to increase the transparency in the solar residential transaction. So the first thing, Barry, you were involved with working on this, is we created, and this is a big lift, a code of conduct for our entire industry. All members of SEIA have agreed to abide by our solar business code. And that code governs conduct, what can be done, what can't be done throughout the industry. And there's a process for how to implement that code, and there's also, I want your listeners to make sure they know, there's a complaint form, which is available on the SEIA website, and it's actually available on several state websites now, where a complaint can be submitted to SEIA in addition to any complaints that a consumer may make to the Better Business Bureau or to the state government. And we can try to take quick action in contacting that company and see if we can't find a resolution to the issue.
Yeah, what I like about that is this code, it's a common sense code. I mean, companies that want to stay in business, that want to have good referrals, that want to have a great reputation, these are common sense things. We're not trying to have every company be a saint, but it's what any sane business person would want to do if they want to be in business 2 or 3 years from now. And I'm really happy that we have that in place, and we have that complaint form if there's some unethical behavior out there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we've complemented that. If that's the backbone, what we've added on top of that is several guides. Most prominent is our guide to residential solar, which is designed for homeowners, and we have that in both English and Spanish. We also have one for landowners who are leasing their land, farmers and others leasing their land for solar development. There are model contracts that are out there that we provide to solar companies to make sure that their contracts or leases that they're using are very clear and have gone through a rigorous peer review process. And lastly, I'd say one of the most exciting pieces, Barry, and I'm actually very proud that we're at the end point of releasing all of these out to the public, are disclosure forms. And for all of those of you who have gone through the purchase of a home, you know that when you sit down at the settlement or closing table, the number of pages that you have to look through can be a foot high. Well, having a federal HUD-1 form, which is the two-page form that you have that summarizes all the different charges and your interest rate and the length of your mortgage and how much money you're either paying or receiving buying or selling a home, is summarized in a very simple, clear fashion. And what we have done is created 3 disclosure forms, one for each of the most common residential solar transaction type. The outright purchase, where you pay cash or take out a loan to buy the system and own it, or the 2 what we call third-party owned systems, the lease, as we mentioned previously, as well as the power purchase agreement, where you're buying power from a system that's put on your roof. And those disclosures will hopefully curtail much of the confusion that is the most common source of friction between the consumers and the solar companies. Before we get on another topic, I just wanted to say that those disclosures, which we are going to distribute very widely through partners such as the Better Business Bureau that have blessed them, are not going to solve every problem. But what they can do is they can help consumers understand what they're entering into by having key terms right in front of them rather than having to dig through a contract or a lease, as well as be able to compare among offers. This is intended to increase competition among solar companies, as well as make it easier for consumers and companies to be on the same page.
Yeah, these things are going to be really helpful. And one of the things that we always counsel our potential customers and anybody looking at shopping for a system is just try and create a little Excel spreadsheet and just compare the offers you're getting from different installers. And it's good to get multiple prices of the cost per watt of the system and any applicable incentives. And then you can really compare things on an apples-to-apples basis, because trying to compare different products, inverters, modules, technology, you're going to get blown away with all the technicalities. But in most cases, it just boils down to the numbers, and it's pretty easy to compare that way. So, Tom, who's making a big deal about these problems? I mean, I hardly ever hear them, other than some stories that pop up in the news every once in a while about a crazy contractor who's just a crook. But I've been reading about lots and lots of other industries that have the same thing. So why is this becoming a big public issue?
Well, I think sometimes, you do have, they're mostly homeowners that are submitting complaints. And whenever, back to the point about solar being fairly new as a competing electricity option for residential, homeowners today, I think whenever you've got something new, it tends to be newsworthy. We get a lot of coverage for solar because of our massive growth across the U.S., so people, find, solar stories sexy. They want to read about solar, and having the flip side, when somebody does have a problem with solar, I think is also attractive in the news. So most of it, I think, stems from consumers raising issues rightfully to either the press or, to the state when those issues arise. However, I do think that there are instances where some of our competitors have really incorporated consumer protection into some of their methods for trying to derail some of the growth of residential solar, which is unfortunate.
So, Tom, you're being really diplomatic here. So let me cut to the chase. So sometimes I've seen certain utilities or utility districts crying out, getting articles placed and getting some press about unsavory solar installers who, may have exaggerated the savings or minimized the cost or just gone out of business. And the utilities are saying, say, hey, look at how bad these residential solar guys are. I just kind of crack up because it's really a typical case of the pot calling the kettle black. I mean, I think the only industry that has lower consumer satisfaction levels than the utilities are, I think, the telephone and the internet companies. So they've got their issues too. But it doesn't matter. I mean, it's just incumbent on us to make sure that we're just running a tight ship and being as fair to customers, because we're trying to do the right thing for economics and the environment. We don't want those bad reputations. Now, are SEIA's efforts in these areas being successful? I mean, are we going to ever get regulated by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? Maybe another question is, will that bureau even exist in 3 months? But we'll see.
So, first of all, I think it's very important for the listeners to understand, as well as any consumers or solar companies listening, the regulations already do exist. I mean, we already are regulated by the Federal Trade Commission, by the CFPB, as Barry mentioned, if you're offering a financial product, and if you're doing any sort of advertising by the FCC. And then, of course, at whatever state you're operating in, obviously out of California here, but for podcast listening anywhere, every single state, all 50 states have consumer protection laws already on the books, most of them for decades, as well as other laws to protect consumers. So the laws are out there. Whether we would be targeted by a specific agency to come after some kind of bust, we're not getting any sort of signal in that way, Barry, that we're on the sort of short list for looking into consumer protection practices. What people do want to know within those agencies, because we are talking to a lot of them, is they want to know more about solar. They're used to dealing with cars, or in recent years, as you mentioned, cell phones, telephones, check cashing, places that have had a lot of vast volume of consumer complaints that are way beyond anything solar has ever experienced. But solar is also getting a lot of attention, as both from the president on down. So, it's something that they need to be and want to be aware of. So we've been providing that level of education to policymakers, and we've also been making sure we're educating the public.
Yeah, so it's important that, what we're doing is great, but it's important not to become complacent. I remember it was maybe about a year ago that there was, I forgot what conference it was. It might have been the NARU conference, and there was a session or maybe it was an Attorneys General conference. It was an Attorneys General's conference, and there was a panel session, and Sean Gallagher was picked to defend the solar industry. But the panel session there was about bad consumer activities and things that are happening in the U.S., and they had 3 topics on the session. One was human trafficking, about how bad that is. One was opioid abuse, and the other was unsavory solar contractors. And just to be lumped into that group, there are people after us, and we just really have to keep our eye on making sure that we continue to do everything we can to represent the industry in the right way. And so that's just terrific that SEIA has taken up that mantle.
Well, Barry, you hit the nail on the head. We are, all of the things I mentioned that we are doing and what others are doing come back to that principle that we'll always be in a better place if we act according to good judgment. The code that we put out, as you said, is a fairly common sense code, but it does provide guidance for companies who do have questions. We are open for business for answering questions if companies want to discuss a particular issue and whether they want to know our opinion on the right way to go. So I think staying ahead of the curve, making sure we're treating the consumers first, treating them right, and making sure that they fully understand. And the FTC is very insistent upon this, that they not only are educated, but they fully understand what they're entering into. The more that we can push in that direction, the better we're going to be served.
All right, that's good. So, Tom, we talked a lot about SEIA, but how did you get into the solar industry? You've been at SEIA for, 7 or 8 years, but what got you started there?
That's a great question. So I actually started back at the very end of the Clinton administration at the Department of Energy and Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy. And Barry, I've always loved solar. I'm a true believer like yourself, and all the way back to high school and college, writing theses and senior papers on the viability of the solar industry. So I've been in solar for a while, and being at SEIA is a very interesting spot. For those of you who aren't as familiar with SEIA, we're the National Trade Association for solar working across the country. And it's a really interesting mix between having industry as our members, but at the same time we interface all day, every day with government. So as a nonprofit, we're right in between the intersection between industry and government and making sure everything moves smoothly. So great place to be, great peers that I work with, and members like yourself and those on the listening audience who really make up the 260,000 people who we now know are part of the solar industry after the last solar census was released.
Okay, good. And so how can people get in touch with SEIA? Let's say you're a homeowner, you're looking at getting solar. How can they get in touch with SEIA's Consumer Protection Services, and what specific advice do you have for them if they have some questions?
Yeah, great question. So the best place to start is on our Consumer Protection Portal, which is right on our site at SEIA.org. There is a Consumer Protection section, and you go in there, it breaks off into a section for consumers and a section for companies. And right in that consumer section, first and foremost, you have our residential guide. The residential guide is very easy. It's 4 or 5 pages, and it not only asks you questions, you should examine about your own finances and your own home and how it's situated, but, questions about the selection process, how you should select a solar company, as well as once you've selected that solar company, really the hard questions that you should ask your solar company. And it's funny having this coming out of the Solar Industry Association, because I've had folks look at it and say, "Wow, you guys aren't holding back in terms of the questions you should ask. You're asking consumers to ask your own members." I said, "Well, this is a very important topic, and we want to make sure everybody's on the same page when it comes to the solar transaction." And there's full transparency there.
Yeah. Well, that's why we want our customers to be happy for 1 year and 25 years after that. Well, that's all the time we have on this week's Energy Show. Thanks, Tom, for joining us. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. If you missed any of today's show, you can always go to our website at cinnamonsolar.com and listen to the podcast.
So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.